She was the queen of the club scene, bold, untouchable, dripping in diamonds and designer. A woman who knew exactly what she wanted and how to get it. Kainisha Cash Doll Trevelyan wasn't just a stripper, she was a brand. Millions followed her every move, mesmerized by her extravagant lifestyle, the fast cars, the stacks of cash, the VIP treatment wherever she went. She had built herself into a modern-day goddess, curves sculpted to perfection, face always camera-ready, a living fantasy. But behind the filters, the fame, and the flashing lights was a woman chasing something deeper. A dream of ultimate beauty. A vision of herself so flawless, so untouchable, that even reality couldn't contain it. But perfection has a price. And Kainisha was about to pay it in the most horrifying way imaginable. It started with whispers, private conversations, secret deals, promises of transformation beyond anything a licensed surgeon could provide. She was no stranger to the knife, but this time was different. This time, she was stepping into a world where money talked louder than medicine, where the operating rooms were back rooms, and where one wrong move could mean never waking up again. And then, one night, she vanished. No posts. No stories. No flashy club appearances. Just silence. Her fans were confused. Her friends were worried. And when they finally found her, when they saw what had become of Cash Doll, the truth was more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. How did a woman so powerful, so adored, end up alone in a dark motel room, her body lifeless, her dreams shattered? What really happened to Kainisha Trevelyan? And who was responsible for turning her obsession with beauty into a death sentence? Before we dive into this shocking case, like this video and subscribe for more chilling tales of ambition, deception, and deadly choices. Kainisha Trevelyan was the definition of a self-made woman. At 29 years old, she had built an empire from nothing, transforming herself into the infamous Cash Doll, a name that commanded attention in strip clubs, on social media, and in the world of high-end influencers. She wasn't just a dancer. She was a brand, a business, a force. With her impossible curves, expensive wigs, and unapologetic attitude, she represented a fantasy that thousands of men craved and countless women envied. But Cash Doll wasn't born into luxury. She came from the kind of place where dreams rarely made it past the front door. Growing up, life wasn't easy, struggle was all she knew. Poverty, bad neighborhoods, a revolving door of hardships that threatened to trap her forever. But Kainisha refused to be another sad statistic. She realized early on that beauty was power. That in a world obsessed with desire, a woman who knew how to use what she had could rewrite her future. And that's exactly what she did. The strip club was her first stage, and she owned it. She wasn't just a dancer, she was a showstopper. The way she moved, the confidence she exuded, the way she made men feel like they'd do anything just to be in her presence, it wasn't just about money. It was about control. And Kainisha controlled everything. But she knew the game. In her world, the money went to the women with the most exaggerated curves, the smallest waists, the most sculpted faces. And Cash Doll was a perfectionist. She had already spent thousands on her body, breast augmentations, lip fillers, a snatched waist, and of course, a Brazilian butt lift. It made her stand out. It made her rich. But it was never enough. Because in the world of social media and nightlife, there was always someone newer, someone cavia, someone who looked like she was sculpted straight out of a fantasy. And Cash Doll wasn't about to be outdone. She watched as women with even more extreme bodies secured brand deals, became social media royalty, and made tens of thousands just for showing up to a club. The bigger, the better. The more exaggerated, the more attention. She told herself that one final enhancement, a body so dramatic it looked unreal, would make her untouchable. That with just one more procedure, she'd be on top forever. But not everyone saw her as a success story. To her fans, she was living proof that a woman could escape the struggle, reinvent herself, and create a life of luxury through sheer hustle. They idolized her confidence, her wealth, her beauty. But her critics? They saw something else. They called her a plastic surgery addict, a walking billboard for unrealistic beauty standards. Some said she was selling a dangerous dream, one that told young girls that if they weren't shaped like Cash Doll, they weren't enough. She didn't care. The haters didn't matter. She was Cash Doll. And soon, she would be bigger than ever. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that this next procedure wouldn't bring her more fame, more power, more money. This time, her pursuit of perfection wouldn't end in admiration. It would end in horror, the Brazilian butt lift. The most dangerous cosmetic procedure in the world. A surgery so risky, it carried the highest mortality rate in the industry. But none of that mattered. Not to the women who wanted it. Not to the surgeons making millions off the trend. And certainly not to Cash Doll. Social media had changed the game. It made the extreme look normal. Perfectly round, oversized curves became the new standard, the golden ticket to fame, fortune, and admiration. It didn't matter how impossible it was, if you weren't shaped like an Instagram model, you were invisible. And Cash Doll wasn't about to be invisible. She had built her entire image around being that girl, the one everyone wanted to be, the one men threw money at, the one who could demand the world just by walking into a room. But there was a problem. She had already pushed her body to its limits with surgeries, and legitimate doctors were starting to tell her no. They warned her about fat embolisms, tissue necrosis, and the silent dangers of too many procedures. She didn't want to hear it. The right doctor, the real doctor, was too expensive, too cautious, too slow. She wanted results. Fast. Bigger than before. That's when she met Malik "Magic Hands" Whitmore. Self-proclaimed body sculptor who performed Brazilian butt lifts, BBLs, in a dingy warehouse in Dallas. That he wasn't a doctor, he was a former medical assistant who had been fired from a clinic for stealing prescription drugs. But that didn't stop women from calling him a miracle worker. He operated in the shadows, far from the sterile lights of real operating rooms. His clinics were cheap motels, abandoned basements, rented airbnbs. His tools. Not medical grade. His results. Unpredictable. But to the desperate, he was a savior. Malik had built a name for himself in underground cosmetic circles. He promised perfection for a fraction of the cost. No hospitals, no paperwork, no questions. Just cash in hand and a few hours on his table. And the best part? No waiting lists. No months of consultations. You wanted a new body? You could have it tomorrow. Of course, there were horror stories. Women left with uneven, rock-hard lumps where curves should have been. Some developed deadly infections, their bodies rejecting the foreign substances he injected into them. A few had even died. But Cash Doll didn't care. Her friends begged her not to do it. They had heard the stories. They had seen the aftermath. But Kainisha waved them off. She wasn't just anybody, she was Cash Doll. If anyone could handle it, she could. Malik promised her something no real surgeon would, a dramatic, exaggerated hourglass figure, bigger than before, more extreme than anything she'd ever had. He told her his special technique was better, that he used exclusive fillers that gave longer-lasting results. All she had to do was bring $7,500 in cash. She didn't hesitate. The date was set. The location? A rundown motel on the outskirts of Dallas. No hospital. No licensed medical professionals. Just Cash Doll, Malik "Magic Hands" Whitmore, and a dream that would soon turn into a nightmare. The motel room smelled like sweat, chemicals, and desperation. The sheets on the bed had stains that had been there long before Cash Doll walked in, but she didn't care. She wasn't here for comfort. She was here to leave as a new woman. Malik was running late. When he finally arrived, his eyes were low, his movements sluggish. The Percocet and codeine in his system made him relaxed, maybe too relaxed. He muttered an apology, but Cash Doll didn't care about that either. She just wanted him to get started. On the nightstand, his tools were laid out, syringes that didn't come from a medical supplier, tubing that looked like it belonged in a hardware store, and a bucket filled with a thick, murky liquid that wasn't fat from her own body but industrial-grade silicone. This wasn't a surgical procedure. It was an injection job, and Malik had done hundreds of them. He pulled out a small vial, an expired anesthetic, barely strong enough to numb the pain. But Cash Doll wasn't new to this. She bit down on her lip, letting him work. Then came the sedation. A cocktail of ketamine and fentanyl. A deadly mix in the wrong hands. He injected it into her veins, his hands shaking slightly as the drug spread through her bloodstream. Within seconds, her body went limp. She was under. And that's when he started. One syringe after another, Malik plunged the thick silicone into her body, molding her like clay. He worked quickly, moving from one side to the other, his breathing heavy, his pupils darting around the room. He wiped the sweat off his forehead. The high was wearing off, and the paranoia was creeping in. Then something went wrong. Cash Doll's body jerked violently. Her chest rose and fell in rapid spasms. Her hands twitched. Then her legs. Malik froze. A seizure. He had seen this before, women reacting badly to the drugs, their nervous systems fighting against the poison spreading through their veins. Most of them recovered. Most of them came back. So he kept going. Another injection. Another dose of silicone. But Cash Doll wasn't coming back. Her body convulsed harder, her mouth foaming slightly at the corners. Then, suddenly, she stopped. Everything stopped. Malik leaned in, tapping her cheek. Yo. Cash. You good? Nothing. He pressed his fingers to her neck. No pulse. Her chest wasn't moving. He stepped back, breathing heavily, his hands shaking. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't his fault. She had paid him. She had wanted this. His mind raced. He needed to think. Fast. No hospitals. Number 911. He had warrants. He couldn't risk it. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He grabbed her lifeless body and dragged it to the motel bathtub, leaving her there like she was nothing more than a mistake that needed to be cleaned up. Then he grabbed his supplies, wiped down whatever he could, and walked out, leaving Cash Doll alone in that dark, filthy motel room. Kainisha, best friend, Soraya had a bad feeling. At first, she ignored it. Cash Doll was always busy, always moving. Sometimes she'd go hours, even a full day, without responding. But this was different. The last text was short, almost rushed. Bout to be badder than ever, sis. Link soon. That was almost 24 hours ago. Calls went straight to voicemail. DMs were unread. Something wasn't right. Zoraya checked Cash Doll's location, something they always shared for safety. The dot was still, unmoving, sitting in a part of town Cash had no business being in. A rundown motel on the outskirts of Dallas. Her stomach twisted. She grabbed her keys and sped there, heart pounding the entire way. When she arrived, the front desk clerk barely looked up. He just muttered a room number. She ran. The hallway smelled of cigarettes, cheap air freshener, and something foul. Something rotten. The second she reached the door, she knew. Her fingers shook as she knocked. Then pounded. Cash. Open up. Silence. She backed up, took a deep breath, and kicked. The door flew open. And then she screamed. The sight in front of her wasn't her best friend. It wasn't Cash Doll, the woman the world worshipped. It was a body. Bloated, lifeless, crumpled in the bathtub. Her once flawless skin stretched tight, discolored. Blood and thick, yellowish surgical fluid pooled around her. Her long, manicured nails, her pride and joy, were broken, as if she had been clawing at something, trying to fight, trying to live. Zoraya staggered backward, bile rising in her throat. Her knees buckled, but she caught herself on the sink. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But it was. Shaking, she fumbled for her phone, her fingers slipping as she dialed 911. "My best friend is dead," she sobbed. Oh my God, she's in the tub. Somebody killed her." The operator tried to calm her, but there was no calming this. There was no coming back from this. Within minutes, red and blue lights painted the motel walls. Officers stormed in, paramedics rushed past, but it was too late. Cash Doll was gone. The news broke within hours. Kainisha Cash Doll Trevelyan, 29, found dead in Dallas motel, suspected botched cosmetic surgery. It spread like wildfire. Social media exploded. Fans were heartbroken, influencers debated, and critics took their shots. She knew the risks. This is what happens when vanity takes over. These underground doctors prey on women like her. She was just trying to be perfect in a world that told her she wasn't enough. Then came the autopsy report. The official cause of death, pulmonary embolism. A fatal blockage in her lungs caused by silicone entering her bloodstream. The coroner's findings were even more horrifying. Cash Doll's body was a battlefield, evidence of previous procedures gone wrong, infections that had healed over, scar tissue from years of chasing an impossible standard. Her insides, doctors said, were poisoned. And somewhere out there, the man who did this, Malik Magic Hands, was still free. By the time authorities realized he was the one responsible for Kainisha Trevelyan's death, he was already gone. No credit card trails. No phone pings. No apartment leases. Just silence. In the underworld of illegal cosmetic surgery, disappearing was part of the game. Malik knew how to move, how to slip through cities like smoke, leaving no trace except for the bodies of the women who trusted him. The police weren't the only ones looking for him. Cash Doll's death had sent shockwaves through social media. The streets were talking. Whispers spread about where Malik might be hiding. Some said he had fled to Mexico, others claimed he was still in Texas, moving from motel to motel. But one rumor stood out above the rest. He was still working. Even after Kainisha died, even after her body was discovered, Malik hadn't stopped. Desperate women still reached out to him, still wired him money for a chance at a bigger butt, a snatched waist, a perfect body. And Malik, cold-blooded as ever, was still taking their money. Still injecting them with poison. The chase intensified. Authorities followed his last known locations, but every time they closed in, he was already gone. Witnesses reported seeing a man matching his description boarding a bus in Houston. Then another sighting in Atlanta. The next in New Orleans. Each time, they missed him by hours. Until Baton Rouge. A confidential tip led U.S. Marshals to a rundown house on the city's outskirts. It belonged to Malik's cousin, a man with a long rap sheet and a history of hiding fugitives. They watched the house for hours, waiting. Then, just after midnight, a man stepped onto the porch. Tall, thin, hood up, scanning the street like a hunted animal. Malik Whitmore. The marshals moved in fast. He saw them too late. Malik made a break for the back door, but he never made it past the steps. 3 officers tackled him to the ground, pinning his face into the dirt. He kicked and screamed, but the fight was over. Inside the house, they found a duffel bag stuffed with $100,000 in cash, stacks of fake IDs, and a handwritten list of new clients, women who had no idea they were about to become his next victims. They dragged him to his feet, wrists bound in steel. The hunt was over. But the real fight, justice for Cash Doll, was just beginning. The courtroom was a war zone. From the moment Malik Whitmore was led inside, shackled and smirking, the tension in the air was suffocating. Reporters packed every seat, cameras flashing, ready to capture the downfall of the man who had butchered countless women in pursuit of profit. But the most powerful presence in that courtroom wasn't the media, it was the victims. One by one, they took the stand. Women who had once dreamed of the perfect body now stood before the jury, scarred and broken. Some lifted their shirts to reveal the grotesque lumps and infections that Malik's hands had left behind. Others limped to the witness stand, their bodies permanently damaged from silicone poisoning. And then came the most chilling testimony of all. A woman who had nearly died under Malik's care. She had paid him in cash, just like Kainisha. She had laid on the same makeshift operating table, felt the same numbing burn of his amateur injections. But unlike Cash Doll, she had lived. Barely. She had spent weeks in the ICU, her lungs filling with fluid, her body rejecting the foreign substances he had pumped into her. Doctors told her she was lucky to be alive, but when she looked in the mirror, she didn't feel lucky at all. She looked Malik in the eye. "You ruined me," she whispered. "And you didn't even care." Malik never flinched. When the prosecutor laid out the evidence, photos of Kainisha's bloated, discolored body, the duffel bag of cash, the syringes filled with industrial-grade silicone, he didn't show a flicker of remorse. His defense? These women knew the risks. That was his excuse. They begged me to do it, he shrugged. They wanted to look like celebrities. I just gave them what they asked for. The jury didn't buy it. After just 3 hours of deliberation, the verdict was announced. Guilty. Second-degree murder. Practicing medicine without a license. Aggravated assault. The list of charges went on and on. The judge didn't hold back. Life in prison. No parole. No chance of freedom. For the first time, Malik's smug expression cracked. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but the gavel slammed down. It was over. The fallout was immediate. Cash Doll's death sparked a nationwide crackdown on illegal cosmetic procedures. Police raided underground clinics, influencers faced backlash for promoting extreme surgeries, and social media was flooded with debates. Some people blamed Cash Doll for chasing an unrealistic ideal. Others blamed the industry that convinced women they had to be bigger, curvier, more exaggerated to be valuable. But no matter which side they took, one fact remained: Kainisha Trevelyan had died for beauty. And Malik Whitmore would rot in a cell for turning that beauty into a death sentence. Beauty has always been a currency. A measure of power. A ticket to wealth, status, and influence. For Kainisha Trevelyan, it was everything. She built her empire on the image of perfection, carefully sculpted and endlessly admired. But in the end, that pursuit of perfection became her downfall. The desire to be more, curvier, bigger, better, led her straight into the hands of a predator. Malik Whitmore wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a healer. He was a fraud who preyed on women's insecurities, lining his pockets with their desperation. And for years, he got away with it. Until Kainisha. Her death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a wake-up call. A reminder of the hidden dangers lurking beneath the surface of social media fantasies. A brutal truth about the cost of chasing an impossible standard. But could it have been avoided? What if Malik had been stopped sooner? What if there were stricter laws against underground cosmetic procedures? What if society didn't push women to believe that their worth was measured by the size of their curves? These are the questions we're left with. And the ones we need to answer before another woman follows the same path. If this story shocked you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because the truth isn't always glamorous. And sometimes, it's deadly.